If what?
While you're dealing with Frank, do you want me to do the intro instead?
No, we're live now. So
Okay.
welcome everyone. Hi everybody, welcome to day 2 of Clinical QAI all day. This is our second session of the day, and loving the engagement that everyone is having for each of our sessions. Day 1 was a great first day, and we had a lot of people chiming in, asking questions, putting stuff into the chat. So we really appreciate everyone's participation in each session. So welcome everyone to the second session of day 2. Thought we could start off with a little bit of a icebreaker question. Since we've been talking a lot about AI and everything it can do, my question to the audience is: if AI could take away one task of your off of your plate forever, what would it be? So we want you guys to go into the chat, let us know. The question is: if AI could take away one task off of your plate forever, what would it be? And hello, Carmen from San Diego. I'm just gonna say for myself, and I said this already backstage, I'm gonna say I want AI to help me exercise, make it more take that off of my plate because I really don't like it. So that would be kind of it. Doing laundry. Rachna said doing laundry. I love that. Anybody else? Putting away the laundry. I agree. Because there's that strange period of when you do the laundry and then you put in the dryer and then it just sits there, or it's in the basket, and we call it the basket or the chair, and it just sits there. So definitely agree with that. Yeah, the laundry number 2, that's true. Cleaning the floors, yeah, don't like that either. So a lot of cleaning, cooking, love that. Anything from the panelists? What would you guys do in this?
I'd have to go. Just changing diapers. I would say
That's a good one. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Love that.
We're quite a ways from that.
Anybody else on the panel?
Since we're in the era of agentic AI, I think sub-agents that can do both cooking and cleaning.
Love it. Doing a little bit of both.
Maybe they can also come up with the menu choices as well. Yeah.
I love that. I actually
send you a menu each day, and this is what you're eating tonight.
Exactly. I actually ask chat sometimes to come up with a recipe based on what's left in the fridge, and it has worked. I've made some really interesting meals. They were tasty and edible, so I'm good. Yeah, I didn't get poisoned or anything. It was great. So now that we got the ball moving and everyone's loosey-goosey right now, we're just gonna go over a few housekeeping rules. So just so that you know, all sessions are being recorded. It's the number 1 question that is asked every single time we host a conference. So just want to let you know, don't worry, we're recording each session and you'll be able to reach out and go on demand and rewatch all of the sessions if you've missed anything. And everyone will receive a certificate of attendance. So whether you go to one or all of the sessions, we will be sending you after the conference a certificate of attendance so that you can brag about it on LinkedIn, share it with your peers, show them and tell them that you went to a cool online clinical QAI all-day conference. And next are the questions. So this is an interactive session. We want you guys to ask your questions. You can ask in the chat or in the Q&A section. This is why we're hosting this event, is so that we can get questions from you guys and we can answer them. This is the perfect chance to do that because you have experts that are here that can answer them. And last but not least, if you guys check the button at the top of your screen, a lot of people have been asking about Montreal systems and what we offer and what we offer. So if you're interested in learning more about our ETMF and EQMS and RIM technology, and or how we can support you guys so that you can be inspection ready, you can simply click on that button, book a demo, and somebody will reach out to you. And if you didn't know already, we have a survey that we are conducting because we want to get a little bit more information about what's going on in the clinical QA space, how AI is impacting that. So we'd love for you guys to take this survey. We're a part of a community. We're stronger together. So we want to get like a lot of like insights of what's going on. So if you can do that, that would be awesome. And as a reward, if you take the survey and attend at least one session, you could win one of these custom kits. As you can see, they're pretty cool. One of a kind, can't find in stores, QA all day Converses. So make sure to check it out. And now I'd like to introduce the panel or the next session, the AI Compliance Playbook, Navigating EMA and FDA Draft Guidances. So I am going to leave it off to you guys. Have a great session, and I will see you shortly.
Great. Thank you, Kim. So welcome everybody to the first panel of day 2 of QAI. Yesterday I thought was a great day. We had 2 amazing panels, lots and lots of great questions, lots of good discussion, lots of really interesting insights. And I'm sure that today is going to be the same. I'm joined today by some very knowledgeable people in this space who have been doing this for quite a long time. And so I think you're definitely going to come away with some interesting approaches, I think that's the right word, to how we can maybe start to evaluate the use of AI and also how we can start to put some governance and compliance around it. So let's get started. I'm just going to quickly introduce our panel. So we're joined today by Frank Henrichman from Qfinity Quality Management. Frank is a senior executive consultant there. Frank has been working primarily in quality management, validation, and compliance for over 25 years in pharma. His roles have included roles at Parexel and Bayer. He also co-authored ISPE's GAMP Good Practice Guide for Validation and Compliance of Computerized GCP Systems, which is obviously important to us because these 2 days are all about clinical, and contributed to GAMP, the GAMP 5 second edition. He's an ISPE member since 2001. He's also a certified GAMP trainer and co-chair of the Global GAMP Steering Committee. So Frank, thank you for joining us today. I'm sure that you're going to bring a bucket load of knowledge to this conversation. The next panelist that we have is Neil Patel from Ipista. Neil is the Director of Technology there, and he's a seasoned technology leader with over a decade of experience driving digital transformation across the pharmaceutical value chain. As Director of Technology, he's led global AI and automation initiatives, including large-scale deployments of LLM and agentic AI platforms for clinical quality assurance, aligning innovation with evolving regulatory standards. Neil champions architecting fit-for-purpose solutions aligned to business outcomes through strategic modernization. So thank you, Neil, for joining us. Next up, we have Jana de Robertis from Montreal. So Jana is our Director of Compliance, and she has over 20 years of industry experience in the validation of GXP computerized systems, with recent focus on the implementation and validation of SaaS solutions for electronic document management and electronic signatures. Jana has been with our organization since 2008 and really has a very strong foundation in computerized systems and can bring a lot to the table in this discussion. And then finally, we have Mike Zwetka, also from Montreal. Mike is our Chief Innovation Officer, and he began his career as a validation consultant over 20 years ago, gaining extensive experience and deep understanding of the life science industry. He has worked globally with numerous life science organizations, helping them implement technological solutions to enhance their regulated processes. As Chief Innovation Officer at Montreal, he aligns our company's vision with our business strategy and drives innovation throughout the organization. He's passionate about how we can leverage technology to improve GXP processes and solve business challenges within the life science industry. So thank you, Mike, for joining us as well. So let's get started. We have quite a bit to cover. as the title of this panel suggests, there is draft guidance that's on the table from both EMA and FDA, which is starting to give us some insight into what the regulators expect. But it is still very much draft, and I think that AI, although there's a lot of talk about AI at the moment, there's a lot of people getting very excited about AI. I still feel that we're not quite where we need to be in terms of establishing a clear framework for how we need to implement it, validate it, and then govern it. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to open things up with the first question to the panel. So just out of interest, today, how are you approaching the validation of AI tools that you're using within regulatory environments so that you can ensure reliability, reproducibility, and intended use? So what's your current experience and approach that you're taking? Who'd like to go first?
I can go first.
Over to you, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, the industry, or our industry at the very least, is very slow in the uptake of AI solutions, especially the ones that created that AI hype in the last years, the generative AI, the AI that is continuously improving and being retrained. And looking at Annex 22 in its draft, it's strongly discouraging that at least for GMP situations. What we currently do not know is whether that draft guidance that is currently geared towards GMP will also be applied similar as Annex 11 to GCP and all the other GXP areas. Personally, I do think so, but we will see what comes out of it. But the validation of an AI-powered system, let's call it that, is only slightly different to what we would typically do, because it is still a system that has a lot of non-AI components for input and output generation. And the AI component in itself requires some special attention. Let's put it that way. You need to be aware of how it has been trained, how you have selected the data for the training, and all of that needs to be documented. And then once you have it live, you need to keep it under control. You need to put controls in place that periodically check whether your AI system is spinning out of your predetermined acceptance criteria. And that's probably the biggest difference from an implementation and operational perspective. My 2 cents.
And just to build on that, my perspective is the validation of AI is going to be very similar, and we don't know what the regulators are going to do in the GCP and the GXP and in the R&D space. But there's common themes around it, right? Taking a risk-based approach as far as what the intended use is, what the use case that you're actually applying AI to. Is it really AI? Is it just are we considering some level of RPA or natural language processing and just putting that, kind of consolidating that into this AI bucket? So it's really understanding the technical aspects of what really is AI, and as part of your intended use and the use case, what part of that is really AI versus automation, some of the other technology. So it's being more conservative as far as understanding where the technology is actually being applied on the business side, but also putting in the governance type of control. So there's those common themes from the normal CSV approach, where taking a risk-based approach, doing a PQ or UAT that follows the business process, and then also making sure that you have the correct governance controls in place for the changes and the retraining and the upgrades to the models as well.
I agree, and I think the FDA's guidance for AI is also providing some additional insight into how they see things, and I think, like you said, Frank, it's largely the same in terms of overall risk-based approach. However, what I found interesting was their way of analyzing the risk was quite prescriptive, where they say you kind of break it down between the model's influence and the model's consequence. So basically, how much are you relying on the model to make a decision for you? How much of a human is in the loop when you get the output? You analyze it and decide to go one way versus the other. So that has to do with the model's influence, and then the consequence, meaning if it were to give you an output and it was incorrect, what would the harm potentially be of that? And so focusing on that type of risk evaluation when you look at the model, I think is actually is very good, and I found that to be quite insightful in how the FDA prescribed that. Versus in the Annex 11, I felt it was a kind of a broad stroke to say, well, generative AI or LLMs should not be used at all in a GMP. I guess they were, I think, referencing critical GMP processes or I guess areas that where you might apply AI. However, I think we can imagine situations where, we were talking about potentially using an AI, a generative AI, to come up with, a kappa, help you with a kappa root cause analysis or investigation, where it's helping you analyze a situation, providing you potentially some, insight, but then ultimately it's a human decides what to do and what action to take. Yeah. I could, make the case there that, generative AI could be actually adding quite a bit of value to help you explore and provide insights into, potential root causes. And, potentially you can make the case where that's, quite low risk, and can be used in that type of context.
Jenna, any other thoughts?
My comment about validation is that, there's a lot that we don't know, but one thing we know for sure is that the fundamentals really haven't changed over decades. It's always apply a risk-based approach, understand what your intended use is and make sure the system meets your intended use. So now what might change is the techniques, or, the risk evaluation might trigger new activities, but fundamentally it's always the same thing. Follow a risk-based approach, document what you're doing, and demonstrate that the system is fit for intended use. That's not going to change.
But don't you find it's a bit challenging with AI? Because it seems to me when I use AI, every time I prompt it to do the same or similar thing, it kind of gives me a bit of a different result. And part of our approach to validation today is reproducibility. So being able to demonstrate that the system consistently functions in the same way. And I think that that's something that we kind of need to get our heads around when it comes to AI. And I think that there needs to be a change in mindset in terms of what does consistent intended, reproducibility, reliability, and intended use mean within the context of AI, because it is slightly different.
Yeah, but we need to be careful, because when we are thinking about introducing AI into supporting our business processes, then we are not thinking about just taking ChatGPT and throwing some prompt at them and then coming back with a kappa or something like that. We are talking about, or most of the time, about very targeted solutions that are specifically trained and configured to perform a particular task, to, let's say, identify potential queries that should be sent to the sites via the EDC system, or to create a kappa or something like that. And when we are then looking at what the output of these AIs are, we should probably not expect that it is word by word the same all the time, but it should be, from a content perspective, the same. Right. Does it really make a difference if it uses active or passive voice? Probably not, but it should have the same facts listed in the same manner.
And so maybe that's what we kind of have to demonstrate in the documentation that we produce to show an inspector or an auditor, this is how we validated it, and this is why we feel that this is an acceptable level of reproducibility, even though it is slightly different. It's interesting.
I think the big challenge when it comes to reproducibility and validating some of these AI tools is the volume of data that's actually needed to train the models. And that's going to vary from vendor to vendor, from solution to solution. So as part of the documentation, as part of how you're documenting how you're training these LLMs and determining the volume of data that's needed, that's one core component of it. But from a regulator perspective, similar to how we have AQLs for sampling inspections for drugs before they're released to the market, there has to be some level of some AQL or thresholds that we need to determine as an industry, as far as what is the volume of data we actually need to train these models at a minimum level. especially because we're dealing with GXP data. So that's something that we haven't uncovered yet. We haven't resolved, but that's something that we need to work with regulators to really determine what is the volume of data that you're expecting for the training.
Yeah, and we need to be very clear about the development side of things. Development meaning train and verification activities. There is unfortunately a bit of overlap in terminology because the AI development guys validate their systems with validation data, but that has nothing to do with computerized system validation. That is a later step. So having a clear understanding of have they used labeled or unlabeled data? Have they, how large was the data set? How was the data set created to test and to validate the model? Is going to be of key interest going forward when we are evaluating the risks of these trained models as part of CSV, and it will determine how much trust we can put into these models.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another interesting thing that sort of jumped out at me when I was reading these draft guidance is the fact that they, and Mike mentioned this, that they expect you to use a more deterministic approach to AI, and therefore you need to provide it with data and you need to provide it with assets that is going to allow the AI to really provide very consistent outputs. Now, the problem with deterministic is that you're really controlling the AI, and so there's maybe a lot of things that it doesn't come out with that it may come out with if you're using more of a probabilistic approach. So, what do you think about that? How can we sort of leverage the true power of AI, which is AI can find things that maybe we wouldn't have looked for or we wouldn't have seen? How can we do that with the way that the guidance is worded? Any thoughts?
Well, I think if you are using, like we were saying, the more probabilistic AI model to help you, do some sort of critical thinking or deep reasoning, one of the techniques that's usually suggested is to always ask the AI to include, the references, I guess the source of the data that it's using to come out with its conclusions. So there are probably best practices when it comes to working with these types of models that can be followed to help make them more explainable, make it better understandable to the user who's interacting with it as to how it came out with the response. And like I said, to always cite the source, and then that way, if there was to be any doubt, you could always go and analyze the information, the data, the raw data that was being used. And I think just in general, having some oversight, whether it's like a statistical plan where we implement to do a verification every once in a while periodically as to understand whether the model is working correctly or is it missing certain things. I think you sort of treat it the way you would if a human was performing that activity. You would implement guardrails, processes around oversight to make sure that in certain situations that are maybe higher risk, you scrutinize a little bit more what the outcome is and perform a more deeper dive into the actual data. I think that's the approach that I would take.
Yeah, we also need to think about what are our acceptance criteria in more detail, because for systems that are non-deterministic, we come up with something like it's accurate 90% of the time. Probably a human being is only accurate 70% of the time.
Right.
Would that increase quality? Absolutely, it would. Is that worth going for it? I think so. But we need to justify that approach. And that goes back to what Jenna was saying about the risk-based approach. I mean, if we can create true benefit for our patients, our subjects within clinical trials, if we can make them safer and more effective, also going forward or looking forward towards creating better data for submissions that would create safer products at the end, it would be unacceptable ethically, from my point of view, not to go for such a solution just because it is not deterministic. right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I guess the regulators will have some hard thinking to do about these aspects in the next weeks,
I
months.
really like that comment though, because it really brings us back to a human level and reminds us of the ethics of all of it. Sometimes we get sidetracked about efficiency and business drivers, but at the end of the day, we have to remember that there are patients and people behind all of this, and that we have to remain patient-centric in the use of our tools.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a broader industry expectation, and it's maybe an education piece where whenever anyone hears about AI, they want AI to develop the next best drug and help all the patients out there, right? But that's not realistic, at least from an AI, especially in the compliant nature that we work in. But there are opportunities for AI to help you determine and gather the information for then you, the human, to make that decision, right? And that's where the low-hanging fruit really is. Because we work in such a regulated industry, yes, we will eventually get to a place where AI can do a much more of the decision making. But right now, we as humans should be the ultimate decision makers. But let's leverage AI to present the data that we need to ultimately make those decisions.
Yeah, the expectation is not that the AI is never going to make the final call. There's always going to be a human involved, and there should be a human involved to the output and be influenced by the decisions, but ultimately we're accountable for the decision, not the AI.
Yeah, so I think it would be interesting to have like a framework where you can sort of take human in the loop and risk assessment and deterministic and probabilistic, and kind of work out the secret formula. So if you're dealing with a very high risk process or area or data set or whatever it is, then maybe you're going to be less probabilistic, unless you can actually integrate more human in the loop, which allows you to maybe be more probabilistic in that particular area. Otherwise, you need to be more deterministic. And so sort of coming up with some kind of framework like that, I think could be interesting and serve as justification as well, right? To demonstrate to the regulators how you're actually managing the risk of what the AI is actually doing, and how it's working. And I think that's.
And we probably need to be cautioning ourselves as an industry and as suppliers to these industries by not getting too AI happy. Not everything needs to have an AI component in it. I don't need a pocket calculator with an AI component. I need a pocket calculator that gives me the right result. There is no reason to pair that with ChatGPT or whatever. It's also not the wisest thing to ask ChatGPT to solve any mathematical problems for me. There are better tools out there for that. So as an industry, everybody's calling for AI. Everybody has these ideas, we can enhance this with AI and we can enhance that with AI. But we need to really find the golden nuggets, really, that really make a benefit for the patient and the industry.
So that's an interesting point you bring up, Frank, that we don't need to use it everywhere. And it's true that there is a bit of a frenzy right now. And we're also experiencing it within our organization. A lot of people want to move very quickly with the use of AI, and we're sort of having to say to them, hang on a moment, we need to make sure that we have proper governance. Have you guys experienced that too in your organizations or with your clients? This frenzy?
Yeah, absolutely. With the clients that we're working with, we're experiencing a lot of the resistance and the AI councils and all the jumps and hoops that you have to get through to even present a business case on an AI, right? So it's great to see that there's the appropriate controls in place. Maybe some organizations have too many controls to even get to some level of a demo where you can see a solution working. Some may have or are more flexible in it. So that's where I think from a sponsor side, they have a lot of these controls in place through the AI Council and governance on what is actually accepted into the organization. But I think as an industry as a whole, putting together some level of a framework, establishing some level of a questionnaire or a framework from a regulator perspective can really minimize and help alleviate and standardize some of this with the sponsors as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to get much more from the regulators, to be honest. But I think that organizations like ISPE obviously they gave us GAMP 5. Is that maybe a solution? Is that something that, and obviously I don't want to put you on the spot, Frank, but is that something that you think that ISPE may sort of entertain, having some kind of framework for AI applications?
You have.
There is.
There is. Okay,
There is.
sorry.
I take words out of my mouth.
It's an artificial intelligence guide. Yeah.
Okay. And it's sort of
Frank's best positioned because of his role at the ISPE to talk about it, but they have a good practice guide for AI, and you can get it for sale price with Black Friday sale right now. Just saw the promo ad for that.
the Black Friday sale. Okay, that's interesting. So obviously, without sort of getting into too much detail with the guide, are these the kind of things we're seeing in there, where we're talking about, a risk-based approach and sort of working out what level of risk is acceptable and how to validate the whole thing? So is that what you guys have done?
Yes. The beauty about all GAMP guides is that they are always at least being reviewed by interested regulators. So they don't endorse it in any way or shape, but they are certainly reading it. They are taking the good parts out of it, rephrase it, put it into their regulatory guidances, and vice versa. So the strong ties between the GAMP community and ISPE in general and the regulators help us develop a framework or guidance documents that actually, if being followed, should create safe applications in that area. So it is certainly worth reading. And as I said, it's being reviewed by the regulators, but not endorsed. So that's the caveat.
Okay, so you heard
the other value in the ISP good practice guides is that they do go through peer review, and there are many people who have their eyes on it. So there's a lot of comments that get considered, and a lot of the concerns of what is being felt through the industry, the pressures that are being felt through the industry, are being addressed through the review cycles. So that they've gone through a lot of scrutiny, and so I think it's really representative of what the industry is talking about. So it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think the other advantage is obviously the industry as a whole typically is using GAMP 5 as their framework for GXP applications, right? So this is it's almost an extension of that, and so it sort of works well together. Okay, I do have another couple of things that I'd like to cover before we start to wrap things up. So around the question of transparency and explainability of AI algorithms. So obviously AI is using a lot of data to do the various different analysis. How do you go about demonstrating transparency and explainability of those algorithms? How do we document that, especially when they're influencing trial decisions or patient outcomes? So what's the approach that we should be taking for that?
Well, I can take that one, or at least get started on it. Well, first of all, we need to be clear on the terminology, because transparency and explainability doesn't necessarily mean that I am able to follow the bits and bytes as they are going through the model, right?
Yeah.
It is geared towards being able to explain how the model has been selected, how the data have been selected, what data has been used to test, to validate, and to verify the component, the AI component during software development. So it's basically going towards an end-to-end oversight from the beginning of the development of that AI component using existing models towards a fully computerized system. So there needs to be a cohesive story saying, oh, we had this problem, we needed to have such and such an AI solution in order to address it. this is how we selected it, this is how we configured and trained it, and this is how we implemented this as part of a computerized system with all the processes around it, all the non-AI software around it, et cetera, et cetera. That to me is the concept of explainable AI. So we need to do more than we probably did for a deterministic or a regular traditional program, but the benefits should be significantly higher as well.
Yeah. Well said.
Explainability is important because if you don't understand how the algorithm is working, well, how do I say this? It ultimately the human in the loop is crucial, right? To being able to use it correctly. But and as I said before, the AI is never going to make the ultimate call, right? It's the human who's going to make the final decision. But if they don't understand what the algorithm is producing, then they may not be making the correct decision. So explainability is really important to understand what the outputs of the AI are, so that you can really interpret that and make the correct decision. So it's now, tied in very much into the development lifecycle, making sure that through the design phase, everything is well documented so that we can explain it. It's not just explaining it from a technological point of view, it's making it simple enough so that the consumers, the people who are using the technology can actually gain the most out of it.
Yeah, so it sounds like they need to be in the loop pretty early on. These end users, right? They need to really understand what the tools do for them.
Would you say it follows an approach more similar to like what we would consider a GAMP category 5 system, right? Like something maybe that you go into the more detailed definition of specifications for those areas of the system that like you were saying, Jenna, where you know that the user needs to understand how this behaves. And I can think of some AI tools where, for instance, you can build an agent that calls a different tool set that is very deterministic, very specific, that if this situation occurs, it's going to perform exactly those tasks for you, and you have a very controlled situation where you have an input and an output as described. But you would have to understand how the overall design of that agent has been made such that you can end up with that type of output, right? So you'd have to explain to the user, if you encounter this type of situation, or you're providing it this type of input, this is specifically the output that you'll get. And so the only way to properly explain that is, I think, to have design documentation that reflects exactly how that model is designed and developed and configured, because in some cases these things are simply just parameters that can be configured at from an end user perspective. So all of that, I guess, comes out in a design specification type of document that you would typically see in a category 5 type system.
Let's face it, I mean, if we are looking at any kind of software offering these days, non-AI offering, can I really explain how it works on the inside? No. I typically buy this off the shelf or a software as a service, and then there is millions and millions of lines of code behind it. And it is getting to the stage where it is significantly beyond the capabilities of the human brain to really explain how it all works. If I have enough time, yes, I can dive into the code and follow the variables through, et cetera, et cetera. If I have enough time and the right experts, I can do that for AI as well, So what's the big deal?
Yeah.
I think it really comes back to the documentation side of it. And I see very similar aspects on the TMF side, right? So we generate all the documents for TMF, we put them in TMF to really recreate and show the reproducibility of the clinical trial to regulators. And that's essentially what we're trying to do with AI from an explainability perspective, is to have the correct documentation in place to be able to recreate, reproduce without getting into the details of the lines of the code, but the overall design of it, how it's making the different calls, whether it's through APIs or files, and what these agents are actually doing. So from a regulator perspective, is making sure that you have enough sufficient documentation in place to really be able to recreate what this AI is doing, whether it's an AI or a human as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last question for you guys, because then we're going to need to wrap things up. So how do you ensure ongoing compliance and performance monitoring of AI tools throughout the clinical trial life cycle, especially as models evolve or are retrained? So what are the techniques that we can implement for that? Because obviously it's an important factor.
Well, first of all, as I said, you need to define what your acceptance criteria are. Is 85% good enough? Is 90% good enough, etc.? And then you need to take data sets that you have defined or predetermined at the very least, and run them through the AI on regular intervals and evaluate those for, does the output still comply with my expectations, right? So it's like an ongoing periodic revalidation of the system by pushing certain amounts of data just through it and have that verified by the experts or against a predetermined result, if you're using something like labeled data, for instance.
Similar to what we do in sort of biostats, where we have sort of a test data set and we run it through the program to make sure that
Exactly. And then you need to just determine on a risk-based approach, taking a lot of variables into consideration. How often do I do this? And how can I automate that? Which would be great.
Which would be better, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, I imagine that we will start to see tools that do that, right? Come on the market.
Yeah, I think it's
Go ahead.
I was just going to expand on that as identifying the metrics, identify the key performance indicators. I think in any, whether it's a person performing a process or supported by a machine or whatever it may be, if you identify the key performance metrics that you can monitor, or you have another system that can monitor and send out alerts when things get out of the normal acceptable ranges, to me is another obvious approach, where you might have to put more of these types of monitoring tools in place with an AI system, just to make sure that it's it's not drifting out of the range. Especially if you're trying to give it less human in the loop. But if you obviously if there's a person involved in every step, you may not need that. But I would say close oversight and monitoring is another important control to ensure that these things are consistently providing the results that you expect as they're evolving, especially models that tend to be, I guess, more dynamic in nature, where they can be retrained on their performance over time. So a person can correct it if it's making mistakes, and then it can learn from that and adapt. But it can also go potentially in the other direction too. So I think that's the approach I would go for.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with that, because when we talk about this continuous retraining, the continuous learning of these large language models from the user input, right? So the user corrects a specific value or makes an edit in the documentation, and the AI continues to learn from it. How do we manage that? How do we maintain that on an ongoing basis? So through the use of monitoring and seeing what the user edits were based on what the AI outputted, and then through the periodic types of validation that Frank was referring to, I think we can have a lot of control on the retraining aspects of it, or the continuous training aspects with AI as well.
Yeah.
And here is a scary thought where we need to get back together in the future. When will AI evaluate the performance of AI?
Yeah.
Or of us.
We're probably not that far off.
Yeah.
But then there could be collusion, so
Sorry, Gianna, I was talking over you.
I'm also thinking that we can kind of tie this back to risk-based approach too, right? So as we're evaluating what the AI is doing, and we can also define the monitoring plan based on the level of risk and whether the human is in the loop or not, and to what extent.
And you should, right? Because the rigor of the monitoring, the frequency of the monitoring, all of that should be determined by a risk-based approach.
Yeah.
And that also should be part of your quality management system. Like, you shouldn't just say you're doing it, to be governed properly, and it's going to come full circle to making sure you have a governance plan in place, and all of these procedures that we're talking about, the ongoing monitoring, the changes that we're going to make to the algorithm, all that needs to be done through change control as well. So it's all going to be tied into your SOPs and so forth. It's bringing it back to the fundamentals of what we've always been doing.
Yeah, but it also means that the folks that are tasked with validating these systems and keeping those into compliance along with their QA departments, etc., need to have all of this knowledge. And that is probably currently one of the biggest challenges, the people factor. Not enough people are having the appropriate knowledge.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's what our next panel is all about. So it's about AI leadership and like how they can ensure that people do have the knowledge that they need to be able to properly leverage this this technology. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our time, and that was an amazing discussion. So thank you to all of you for your insights and your experiences. I am going